chain, and this service has celebrated that for 300 years. People have eaten and worshipped and talked and worked things out and built. As we prepare to eat our next meal, let us give thanks for the fellowship that is woven into every stone and every fibre and every part of our being. Let us give thanks for the food we are about to eat and hold in our hearts those who have none. Let us give thanks for the fellowship we share and hold in our hearts those who live in fear. Let us eat together, share together. May God bless the food and our fellowship. Amen.
Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, I knew it would be difficult to stop the talking, eating and drinking. It's always the same with Unitarians. I'd like to wish you, rather late in the day, good afternoon, and it's my very pleasant task now as chairman of this congregation to offer my appreciation for your attendance on such a momentous occasion, our 300th anniversary celebrations. If you're here as visitors, you're very welcome, and I'm grateful to you all for joining us and encouraging us on our special day. If you're church members, you're equally welcome. Your presence not only signifies 3 centuries of deep and enduring commitment to the Unitarian tradition in Bury, but also represents this church's current continuing congregation, as well as its preceding generations. It's been gratifying to see so many people here today and to feel the warmth and goodwill which surround us. There are sadly people who would have liked to be with us today but were unable to attend. They've all sent good wishes which I've amalgamated into one message of similar sentiments, and I'm afraid our numbers have been decimated today by some nasty viruses that are going the rounds. The message from all our absent friends offers heartiest greetings and warmest congratulations to our congregation on reaching such an important landmark in its history. They will all be thinking of us today and are disappointed not to be here, and send their very best wishes to us for a successful and enjoyable day, which I think you'll agree we've had. We're shortly to hear 4 brief presentations from church members, each one of which covers a significant period in the history of this church. Susan Holt, our Chair of Trustees, will tell us about the Kay family, active in this church around about 1737. Susan Mitchell, who chairs our Social and Fundraising Committee, has information about the Alcock sisters and their illuminated manuscript, which dates from 1850. Roger Mills, our Assistant Treasurer and our Property Trustee, will speak about our land at Holbottom, where our First World War graves are situated. And Neville Kenyon, our Deputy Chair of Trustees, will detail the development of the Matthew Haygarth homes circa 1957. I've been asked to announce, but please don't get up now, if you wish to take food home, do so afterwards. So I'll leave you now in Susan's capable hands. Thank you all for being here today, for your support and for your ongoing encouragement. Thank you.
I'd just like you to imagine for a few minutes that you're living in 1737. Bury is a busy cotton mills, and John Kay has just invented the flying shuttle. George II sits on the throne, and Robert Walpole is the current Boris Johnson, as he was the Prime Minister. You have just been to the chapel service and are now enjoying time with your family and friends. All the ladies would be wearing long dresses, bonnets and shawls, and the men in their jackets, breeches, and the more wealthy ones in their long leather boots. The children will be dressed in smaller but similar clothes to their parents. It is Sunday, and everybody has attended their own chapel for service, and then off to visit family or friends for lunch. This was before B&Q opened on a Sunday. The working classes walked, the middle class men would ride, and the ladies would travel by carriage. One such family was the Kay family, who lived in Baldingstone, which was situated 3 miles on the north side of Bury. This house, which is still there, was used for many gatherings of clergy and members of the chapel congregation. Each Sunday, Dr. Robert Kay, his wife Elizabeth, son Dr. Richard Kay, and their 3 daughters, Rachel, Elizabeth and Alice, would travel down what is now Waldsey Road and down through Silver Street to the chapel here in Bury. How do we know all this? Well, when Richard Kay reached the age of 21, he started to write a diary. And for the next 13 years, he wrote on his life as a doctor and a member of the Bury Chapel. He was a very religious man, but eventually decided to follow his father's footsteps and become a doctor, receiving patients at home and visiting on horseback those patients who were too ill to come to him. His diary is unique because it gives us an insight not only to his personal life, but also medical matters, and throws much light on the life and worship of nonconformists at the time. The diary contains a lively account of events in the 1745 rebellion, in which it shows the profound loyalty of Protestant descent in Lancashire. Only the most urgent needs of his profession kept Richard away from chapel on the Sabbath. It was his custom always to make notes on every text of every sermon he heard. Titles like, "Lord, may I be sober and virtuous, whether at home or away." This helped him to remember each sermon. That was one of the shortest titles, and it is well known that the sermon followed was of great length. One Sunday he wrote he'd forgotten to take paper and pencil to chapel, so he couldn't write his usual notes, and he was most annoyed. Many of the services were given by Reverend Thomas Braddock, whose grave you can see in the graveyard next to the church, but Richard also attended local chapels at Stand, Cockimoor and Manchester. On the medical side of the diary, Bladyball Eaton, Richard seems to have been kept very busy with patients who had a problem with broken bones, which he needed to set, disorders of the liver, heart, and a very violent spotted fever and smallpox were rife at certain times in the district. He carried out operations which included cataracts, abscesses, often in patients' own homes with no anaesthetics available to relieve their pain. Many babies were delivered by him, but it is a sad fact, though, that many of these ailments resulted in death, and as a result, he attended many funerals. The diary mentions many male members of his family, his father, uncles and cousins, but there are hardly ever mention of his mother or sisters, although we do know that Mrs. Mary Kay, probably his aunt, in 1735 left the amount of £10 and later certain rents at Holbottom, the interest of which was to go for the support and maintenance of the Presbyterian minister. The diary ceases to be written in July 1750, perhaps because his father was ill as he died a few months later, and Richard had to carry the work on his own. In October 1751, Richard died aged 35. His sister Elizabeth died aged 31, and his mother died aged 67, all from what is now believed to be an epidemic of typhus. The funerals were done together by Reverend Braddock, who found it very mournful and sorrowful to have 3 members of the same family buried at the same time, and he gave a service which was 25 pages long. Although Richard's diary would never have made a bestseller list on books to take on holiday, it was in his time considered to be a good read. If anybody would like to borrow my copy, please do. But please do be aware, you'll probably be asleep shortly. But please remember that it is through his diary that we know about medicine, our chapel and nonconformist religion of that time.
Thank you.
Well, it's fallen to my lot to introduce to you the illuminated manuscript which is held in the glass-covered display case at the back of church. To those of you who haven't already had the opportunity, the replica copy of this very precious manuscript is truly wonderful. It's illuminated, it's colourful, and it's relatively easy to read. It is open for anyone to look at. There it is, the replica copy. And it is a record of the 5 services which were regularly used in 1878 by the Unitarian Church here in Bury. Each service was illuminated by one of 5 sisters surnamed Alcock, who lived with 5 other siblings, 10 of them altogether, feel sorry for Mrs. Alcock, at Hudcar House on Hudcar Lane, which runs almost parallel with Walmesley Road at the bottom end, and comes out eventually at the end of Bridge Street onto Belgrave. The parents of these 10 siblings were Randolph Hibbert Alcock, who was born in 1834, and his wife, Jane. In 1876, Father Randall had written and published a book of 266 pages called The Botanical Names for English Readers, in which he simplified the scientific names of plants to assist those who otherwise struggled with Latin names. And with the help of John Wright, Reverend John Wright of Bath, and James Britton of the British Museum, it gave a general sketch of the history of botany up to that time. Something good from Berry, not only Benson's topic. Jane Alcock was 20, Florence 19, Beatrice 17, Esther 16, and Ethel 14 when they worked on and produced this amazing manuscript. The original is bound in black leather. This is obviously a replica and it just has a black cardboard backing. They're black leather boards. The front was ornamented with a central gilt-lined embossed cross and inscribed Bank Street Chapel, Bury, and the spine with the words Prayers for Public Worship. Not easy for you to see, but it is an excellent copy. Each of the 5 services is illuminated, and that is an example of the illumination that was done. The manuscript is produced on 113 double-sided pages, approximately 11.5 by 9.5 inches, with separating pages between them, and it's very securely preserved for posterity and is very, very precious. We can handle this copy and wonder at its beautiful reproduction without a problem. The case is kept unlocked at the back of the church. You simply have to lift the lid. Handmade books, usually on Christian scripture, were produced in Western Europe between the 500s and the 1600s, most often by monks in abbeys, who spent all their daylight hours, just imagine, all their daylight hours, toiling away regardless of their health, and they were expected to turn up regardless of how well or ill they felt. The work was incredibly intricate, detailed, and demanding, taking its toll of both their physical and mental stamina. They had to prepare their own vellum and create their own paints, largely derived from plants, and the gold leaf, which was used in order to indicate their praise of God. The silver point drawing was a technique popular in the 15 and 1600s, using an instrument with a silver wire tip on specially prepared paper. But they could only work in daylight hours because of the risk of fire from the candles if they lit those. The most popular manuscript was a Book of Hours, a Christian devotional of prayers to be said at set times throughout the day. Only those of significant means could afford these, but many of them have survived and are to be found in churches, museums, and some in private collections. But the invention of the printing press by a Johannes Gutenberg in 1440 marked the beginning of the end for handwritten scripts, and especially for illuminated scripts. You may have heard of the Book of Kells, which was produced by monks of St. Columba's in Iona and Lindisfarne, but it was brought away for safety from the Vikings to Kells in Ireland. We have no information about how the 5 sisters came to devote so much skill, time, and patience in producing our amazing manuscript. The first service is no less than 26 illustrated pages of intricate illumination of both script and borders, which was done by Jane, aged 20. In my eyes, it's not unlike a Church of England service, with psalms, collects, responses, the Lord's Prayer, the Creed and the Confession, with a plea for redemption from sin. There is no mention of God in 3 parts. If any of you have seen the old copies of the services that used to be used and were still, I think, in use way back in the 1940s, the services are in fact very like the Church of England services. I have to tell you that when I was doing my nursing training, we still had prayers at the end of every day on the wards, and it was up to whoever was in charge on that day to conduct the evening prayers. And I got a lot of help from this book, which had been my mother's, which I took with me to London. And the prayers in it are still prayers that we use frequently in some form or another to this day, as I'm sure the ministers here present can agree. Some of the words in here are beautiful. The second service was done by Beatrice, who was 17. It's 29 pages long, not quite as intricate, but no less beautiful in a simpler way. And again, it had pleas for redemption and a version of the confession in it. Ethel 14 and Esther 16 combined on the third service, in which there's a lot more writing, very detailed writing, but only on 16 pages, and that includes what I think is the Magnificat. Maybe, Kate, you can verify that for me.
Not off the top of my head.
And Florence 19 illuminated the fourth service, which is only 20 pages long, and Esther 16 contributed the fifth service containing 17 pages. We are unbelievably fortunate to have this invaluable, precious reminder of our heritage, so beautifully preserved, and I hope that in time you will take the opportunity to enjoy the copy in our worship area, and think of those 5 sisters spending hour after hour tirelessly writing, painting such a magnificent manuscript which has stood the test of time and been handed down to us. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Roger. I'm the property steward, property trustee I should say, for this church, and one of my responsibilities is to look after a modest portion of land owned by our church and located about half a mile from here, known as Holbottom. As you all know, we are here today to celebrate 300 years of nonconformist worship. In November 1719, our first chapel on this church, on this site, was opened. One of its founders was a man by the name of Samuel Waring. He died in 1742 and willed a modest estate of land for the upkeep of the ministry. That was known as Holbottom. He was one of our most generous benefactors, but was very nearly failed in his wishes to endow the church. In Samuel's will, the estate, about 5.5 acres, but unfortunately the will was declared invalid, and the estate passed jointly to his 4 daughters and 1 son-in-law. The heirs generously decided to honour their father's wishes and agreed to sell the estate to the then trustees of the church for a nominal sum. Again, fate intervened. Before the transaction was completed, 2 of the 4 daughters died. The remaining owners of the estate started up all over again and agreed to sell the land as before. A new agreement was drawn up, and this time executed without problem. In 1852, when our third church in Bank Street was opened, the graveyard in front of the church, that's the gardens as they exist at the moment, became full, and a new burial ground was established on part of the land belonging to the Holbottom estate. A cemetery chapel was built on the site and formally dedicated on Whitsunday, the 31st of May 1857. Burials continued there for 115 years until 1972, during which time 600 graves were dug, including 2 war graves for Harry Greenhalgh and Arthur Ashworth, who were lost during the First World War. Both of these soldiers are included amongst the names listed on our present war memorial, which is located in the garden alongside our church. Altogether, the names of nearly 80 men who were lost during the 2 world wars from our 3 congregations of Chesham, Haywood and Bank Street are listed. It's interesting to note at this point that our previous minister, who we heard just a little while ago, Reverend Beryl Allerton, compiled a book of remembrance, which is this. It is around, which contains much well-researched information about the listed men. Incidentally, the contents of this book are on our website, if anybody wants to look into that information. To return, however, to Holbottom. By 1975, the cemetery chapel was severely damaged by vandals and was demolished in the interest of safety, and the cemetery finally closed on January the 1st, 1979. Subsequently, even though extensive safety and remedial measures were taken, the area continued to give cause for concern, and by the year 2000, it had again fallen into a derelict and dangerous state. The decision was taken by the trustees to clear the area. Once the surviving relatives of those buried had been contacted and legal formalities completed, it was landscaped, cleared, and with clear grassy areas, improved boundary walls and access provision. It has been carefully maintained ever since as a local amenity by the church. The war graves were properly displayed and a commemorative plaque installed. Although the graves were landscaped, the exact locations of the original burial plots remain and can be determined from the site's accurate maps. A Celtic cross marks the entrance to the site and now contains the ashes of more recently deceased members. The area continues to be well maintained, with grass routinely mowed, trees and shrubs clipped as necessary, and grave locations checked for occasional subsidence. It is used periodically by the church to hold short services and to commemorate Remembrance Day. In 1997, the remaining land at Holbottom, still owned by the church at the time, was sold for development. The proceeds from this, still restricted by the terms of Samuel Waring's will ensure the financial stability of the Unitarian ministry in Bury for many years to come. Great thanks to them.
This is the story of the Matthew Haygarth Trust, and is particularly focused on the very wealthy ones among you. It's all to do with bequeathing money to Bury Unitarian Church. Thanks to our benefactors of the past, we're able to afford the high costs involved in maintaining this congregation. Live giving is important, but its supplementation by long-term investments is crucial to our dynamic presence in the centre of our town and beyond. This church and our town are grateful to our benefactors of the past, the Unitarian industrialists who helped Bury to be the place it is today, the Wrigleys and the Grundys and the Hults and more besides. The art gallery across the road was built specifically to house the fabulous Wrigley collection of paintings and works of art. In addition, there were generous monetary contributions to this congregation, which have continued even since the 19th and 20th century. So I take this opportunity to tell the story of one such legacy and how its proceeds continue to serve our local community. Matthew Haygarth was a British expat living in Malta, to where he retired after selling his quirky, successful restaurant in Prestbury. I think that lets the imagination run riot. He died on the 4th of February 1988 after a short illness, aged 79. He's buried in Malta. He never married. And Matthew had family. I can see various people here, so, oh yeah, we remember him. He had lots of connections with this congregation. When he lived in Bury, he was a regular attender. His sister, Violet Haygarth, was married to Alex Rogers, who was mentioned this morning, this afternoon, during the service, and he was an eminent trustee here in his day. Alex and Vi, whom some here will remember well, had a son called Anthony. It was never Anthony, it had to be Anthony, who was therefore the nephew of Matthew Haygarth. And Matthew's will left the bulk of his estate to establish a residential home for the accommodation of elderly single persons. Such a home to be provided and administered under the auspices of Bury Unitarian Church. The legacy was 300,000, and that's over 1 million in today's money. Nephew Anthony, unsurprisingly, contested the will, causing a lot of delay, but was unsuccessful. So all the money came here. Well, you can imagine the frisson of excitement that ran through the church community when the news was announced. And a board of trustees was established under the chairmanship of David Sayer, who was Matthew's solicitor, and who remains chairman of the trust to this day. The problem was that the Unitarian movement had no organisation for establishing such a scheme. And after much investigation, a partnership was forged between the trustees and the Manchester Methodist Housing Association. Well, after much toing and froing, the disused Baptist Chapel on Bolton Street, Ramsbottom, was identified as a suitable building. Thanks to delays, the fund had almost doubled to £600,000. This was due, if you remember, in those days, to high interest rates, sort of 10% and so on, the Halifax share flotation, and a grant from English Heritage of £100,000, which was really because it was an historic, the building itself was listed. The chapel, the Baptist chapel, was converted to form 12 individual self-contained apartments, which are popular with the residents, including our own Barbara Bamford and Jean Brookhouse. Unitarians have first choice when a vacancy occurs. Bear that in mind. The building is now administered by a huge housing association, Great Places. And the trustees meet with them twice a year, where rents and service charges are agreed for the following year and any issues addressed. The Unitarian contribution, thanks to Matthew, has been the provision of 12 beautiful apartments offering special financial and material advantages compared with similar types of accommodation available locally. So to all our current wealthy members and friends, let this be a fine example to you all. A bequest to this congregation will help to improve the lives of countless generations in the future. Pass it on.
One thing, if you didn't know already, that you will have learned today is that no Unitarian can speak for any of the Unitarians. Now, I've really enjoyed this afternoon, the food and the entertainment, but I cannot, in all due conscience, thank anybody unless I get a show of hands confirming that that's the overall feeling. Take that. I'm not even going to ask for objections because someone will, just to make it awkward for me. Could our four speakers please stand up, because that was fascinating. Did anybody not enjoy the refreshments? Then in that case, Susan, Jean, Pam, two of you are standing, the other one ought to be, but won't. Okay, can we have a round of applause? They really have worked incredibly hard, I'm sure you'll agree. And thank you to everyone for coming. It has been a very special day. I hope you've enjoyed it. A plug for our Carols by Candlelight service next Sunday at 4. The congregation gets a lie-in again. Next Sunday at 4, you're very, very welcome to join us. You're welcome at all our services, obviously, though I'm looking at a lot of faces who are at other churches, so I won't poach you. If you can use any of the leftover sandwiches, please take some. We don't want to waste food. I wish you all a safe journey home, and thank you again for joining us for this very special day.